Welcome to the Wild About Turkey Hunting podcast, a show for those who love the thrill of that first morning gobble, who love sharing the outdoors with a close friend, and for those who never want to stop learning about this awesome ritual we call spring turkey hunting. I'm Josh Davis. I'm wild about turkey hunting, and I bet you are too. Thanks for joining. Let's get started. Well, let me start off by saying thank you. The Wild About Turkey Hunting podcast was part of the top 50% of podcasts online in 2025. Over 3,000 downloads, recognized by Spotify as a 2025 marathon show, a 2025 instant hit show, and a 2025 most shared show. And all of that credit is to you, my fellow turkey hunters. So again, thank you for your support. I would be grateful if you would continue to support the show, whether by donating or simply leaving a positive review on whichever platform you are finding this podcast. But before we get started in today's topic, I kind of want to look back at some of the memories from last season's hunt, a couple of the lessons learned, and some things that I want to pass on to you. In March, I had the privilege to head down to Florida again to hunt Osceolas, and on day one, I remember that we had a gobbler that came in from another direction that we weren't expecting it to come from. I had gone down to hunt with a friend, and he had noted that the turkeys like to roost in a particular area, and so we set up there, and after sitting there for almost 3 hours and not hearing any gobbling, all of a sudden I let out a call, and boom, he gobbled coming in from behind me. And he circled around and came down off my left and out in front of me, and at that time, I was hunting with my bow. I was tucked up in a blind and hoping to get a headshot on this gobbler. Well, it just happened to be that he was moving around a lot, and I kind of rushed the shot, and I just barely missed him. Looking back at the footage, I could see where my broadhead just barely missed his head. But nonetheless, he got to the other side of a barbed wire fence that was right there, and even though he was within shotgun range, he certainly was not going to be able to be shot with a bow, especially trying to sneak an arrow through that barbed wire fence, and I didn't want to take a chance on wounding the bird and not finding him. So I waited out for the next day. Because my hunt was limited and I only had a few days, I decided to swap out my bow for my shotgun. So I set up in that same area, and lucky for me, that bird was roosted in the spot that my friend had scouted and said that he would normally be in. He gobbled several times on the roost, flew down, came in, working the call beautifully, but as he got closer to where I had shot at him the day before, he decided to duck out to the side and slip out to my right, and then headed out into a big pasture and didn't give me a chance to have a shot at him because there was too much blocking my shooting lane out to that right side. So I decided to make some adjustments to be ready for day 3. I slipped into that same spot earlier in the morning, and I went ahead and I clipped and cleared a bunch of shooting lanes right where that gobbler had slipped through the day before, anticipating a pattern and trying to capitalize on it. And sure enough, that bird gobbled on the roost. He came right through. And when he thought he was going to give me the slip again that same time to my right, I had already cleared out a spot where I could see him as he came through and was able to shoot him and took a nice Osceola home with me from that Florida trip. So I think back to April, I think about my hunt in Ohio in my home state. And I scouted a morning before the season, and I confirmed that there was a gobbler that was tucked back in this little pocket of a piece of property that I could hunt. And the third day of the season, I returned. And for the first hour, it was completely silent. There was no gobbling on the roost, and I saw one hen. So I decided to just sit there and listen. I had a good tree, I had a good field of view, and I felt good about the spot. And about an hour into the morning, he finally gobbled on his own. And once you know, I called him all the way up out of this ravine and right up to my setup. A big takeaway for me on that hunt was just because it's quiet on the roost time doesn't mean that there's not turkeys around. And finally, I was reminded in the month of May as I headed up north with my dad and with my son, the best setup doesn't always include a tree. On the second afternoon of the hunt, we pulled up to our spot and we heard a bird gobbling down in the bottom all on his own. It was about 2:00 in the afternoon, and we were surprised, but there he was. And an afternoon bird can be a real gift. So as we heard this bird gobble about 400 or 500 yards away, we decided we were going to drop down in through the woods. We had to cross a CRP field and then get back down into another little section of woods, which was much more sparse. It was filled with a lot of willows and had a lot of sycamore trees back up in there, a couple birch trees. And it was still kind of a semi-open area. But we knew that the bird was all the way down at the bottom and had to cross a pretty opening of native grass. And he was down in a swamp and he was gobbling, but he was gobbling good. So when we started calling, he immediately started answering. Well, this bird had come all the way up, gobbling the whole time. But as we got quiet, ready for that cat and mouse, kind of for him to search for us kind of approach, it got quiet. We knew he was coming. And then all of a sudden he gobbled up behind us. He had swung around and he had gotten up behind us and gobbled a couple times. In fact, as we let him kind of drift off a little bit, I called again, hoping he would swim back down. At one point, I remember looking over my right shoulder and my son, Owen, who was sitting behind me with the camera, I looked behind him, and about 12 yards behind him was that gobbler just standing there looking for us. Thankfully, he did not see us, and he worked back down out of sight. And as I called again, he gobbled in. It was obvious that he was heading all the way back down to that swamp from where we had first heard him. So I decided that we were going to do what we could to get back down as far as we could to where this bird liked to hang out, knowing it was already a comfortable spot for him and where he wanted to be. The problem was there was no more cover to be used as far as trees to be able to walk upright to get in close enough for a shot. So I stripped off my vest. I took off everything that I could to keep me light and mobile, and I ended up belly crawling about 80 yards out and setting up underneath a little willow shrub. And I called to him several times, and it took him a long time to finally commit, but he was willing to come back up out of that swamp to the edge of that native grass opening, and I was able to shoot him. But that hunt in itself took almost 4.5 hours from the first time we heard him to the time when I actually was able to pick him up. Sometimes you just have to go to where that longbeard feels comfortable. And he'd gobble a lot, which is awesome for public land, but he wouldn't budge. And I had to take the game to him. And it was obvious that this bird was cautious for a reason. One, he was on public land, but also because he had been shot before. As I was field dressing him, I saw that he had number 5 pellets in his legs, and I was shooting number 9 TSS, so I knew that it wasn't from me. He was a cautious bird, but he was comfortable in his zone, but he was hard to access, and I had to modify my setup. So those were a couple lessons as I look back over this last season that I will definitely take with me into the field for the next season. And I don't know about you, but I'm also planning on having some goals for this new season. A couple things I want to try, a couple things I want to do differently. First thing is I'd like to learn how to use successfully a wing bone call and a tube call. So I've already been picking one up, giving it a try, and I'm planning on buying a tube call soon just to diversify my opportunities of calling. I'd like to learn how to gobble. It's something I've not really done that well with before. I have a gobble shaker tube, but I feel like there are so many other options that sound much more realistic, whether that be with a box call or a mouth call or tube or something else. I'd like to learn how to gobble. I'd also like to take some time to hunt with a local veterans group. There's a ministry here in the area that takes out veterans for turkey hunts in the spring. I'd like to spend some time trying to encourage some men who have given everything for our country and give back a little bit the joy of turkey hunting. I'd like to also be able to master a new locator call. I got a new one for Christmas from my family. It's capable of doing a hawk scream and also a wood duck call, a pileated woodpecker, a peacock, and several sounds that I just really want to perfect, and kind of just expanding my toolbox for locating a gobbler this spring. So what about you for this year? As you think about the season, are there some goals that you have, or are there some things you would like to do differently? I think that the best thing that we can do is maybe look back at the things that we know that are the basics and see what we can learn from there to set new goals and to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes again. A great friend of mine who went on to be with the Lord last year was often quoted saying, sometimes we don't need to be taught, we just need to be reminded. And I think for the Apostle Paul that was something that was part of his ministry as well. In Philippians chapter 3, he encourages the brothers and sisters of the faith to be joyful because you belong to the Lord. And then he goes on to say this, it is no trouble for me to write about some important matters to you again. And I think that as we think about springtime, that we need to review and prepare ourselves so that we can perform the routine play in the clutch situation. So for today, let's just take a look back at a turkey hunter's playbook. If you've ever walked out of the turkey woods wondering what just happened, this episode is for you. Because turkey hunting has a funny way of humbling even the most confident hunters. One day it feels easy, and the next day it seems like you can't buy a gobble. And what I've learned over the years is this, that consistent turkey hunting success isn't about fancy calls or viral tactics you see online or luck. It's about preparation, discipline, and patience. It's about doing the little things right before the season, during the setup, and in the moment when everything is on the line. Today, we're walking through what I consider the backbone of spring turkey hunting: scouting, closing distance, setting up, calling with restraint, reading birds, and finishing the deal the right way. These are lessons learned the hard way, often after blown hunts and missed opportunities and long silent sits. So, whether you're brand new to turkey hunting or you've chased gobblers for decades, settle in. This one's meant to feel like a conversation on a tailgate after a long morning in the woods. So let's start where every good turkey hunt actually begins, long before opening morning. Preseason scouting is the most overlooked skill in turkey hunting. Everyone talks about calling, but calling doesn't mean much if you don't know where turkeys already want to be. And turkeys live by routines. Their roost trees, travel corridors, feeding areas, strut zones. If you can identify those, then you're no longer guessing and you're just hunting with intent. Now, here's the key: scouting is not always interacting with birds. When I scout, I don't want to do any calling. I don't want to put any pressure on them. It's about reading sign and learning the land. I often look for tracks in soft dirt, droppings under big trees, feathers along field edges, scratching in the woods, and dust bowls in open timber. I can remember one March afternoon walking around a piece of public property thinking that there are no turkeys here. And I never saw a bird and I never heard a gobble, but I kept finding fresh scratching on the south-facing side of a ridge and feathers near a creek bend. And wouldn't you know that opening morning as I got there were 3 gobblers perched in that spot, right where the sign said that they would be. For the times that I had scouted before the season, they never gobbled once, but that morning spoke loud enough. And that hunt taught me something important: that scouting doesn't always lead to loud cinematic hunts. Sometimes it leads to quiet confidence. You sit down knowing you're in the right place, even when the woods feel dead. And that confidence keeps you patient, and patience kills turkeys. And listening is just as important as looking. Dawn and dusk are prime times to hear gobbles as birds fly up or down. And you can pinpoint roost locations without bumping birds. And if you can do that, you've already won half the battle. So let's talk about closing the distance. One of the biggest mistakes I see hunters make is calling from too far away. Long distance calls ask a gobbler to do a lot. He has to cross terrain, expose himself, maybe leave hens, and turkeys just don't like to do that. The closer you are, the more realistic your calling sounds and the more likely he is to commit. And this is where woodsmanship comes in. Using ridges and creeks, timber edges, low ground to hide movement and sound, all those things come with planning your approach before you ever take a step. And here's a simple rule to live by: if I'm calling and hoping a bird hears me, then I'm probably too far away. I want to be close enough that I can imagine shooting him from where I'm sitting. And terrain is your best friend, because creeks will mask your footsteps, ridges block sight lines, shadows hide movement, and hunters who master terrain consistently get closer. And the closer you get, the more likely you are to kill turkeys. One habit I've developed is stopping every 20 or 30 yards to reassess. Is the bird still gobbling? Has the terrain changed? Am I about to expose myself to his line of sight? Those pauses prevent rush mistakes and keep the hunt under control. So finally, in the setup is where most hunts are won or lost. Once you're positioned, setup becomes everything. As you well know, turkeys see incredibly well, and they don't miss much. Sitting with solid cover behind you, like a wide tree or a bank or at least some thick brush, breaks up your outline and hides small movement. And do what you can to avoid skylining at all costs. Sitting on a ridge with the sky behind you is a guaranteed way to get busted. Instead, set up just below the ridge lines or on benches where you could see without being seen. I once had a setup for a perfect calling scenario right in the middle of some public land out of state, but there was nothing behind me. And the gobbler came in silent, and guess what? He spotted my outline and he vanished. But that same bird, 2 days later, different setup with an oak to my back, and he never knew I was there, and I was able to shoot him. Good setups create confidence, and confidence helps you sit longer, which matters more than most people realize. If you find yourself fidgeting, constantly adjusting, or second-guessing your position, that's usually a setup problem, not a patience problem. And let's also remind ourselves about calling with discipline. Calling is meant to communicate, not necessarily dominate. One of the hardest lessons to learn is that calling less often works better. Real hens don't call nonstop, so soft, infrequent calling sounds natural, and silence even creates curiosity. Soft clucks and purrs for close birds, and louder yelps when you need to reach out. But always start softer than you think is necessary. Early mornings are especially important. Tree yelps and light clucks mimic hens that are waking up, and aggressive calling too early could push birds away. Some of my longest dry spells in turkey hunting happened when I was calling the best. Things turn around when I learn to shut up and let silence work. Silence also forces you to listen better. You hear footsteps in leaves, drumming, wing beats, and details you miss when you're focused on calling. I also think it's important for us to remind ourselves about patience and silence and commitment. You probably agree that turkey hunting tests patience more than skill. When a gobbler is responding and moving your way, don't rush him. Let him do the work. If he's coming, you're already winning. Some birds take a long time, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes more. In terrain and hens, just being cautious can slow everything down. The longest sit of my life was nearly 3 hours. It ended up with a gobbler stepping into view from my far left. There were no gobbles, no warning, just patience paying off. And that hunt reshaped how I define success. Success isn't constant action. It's staying mentally locked in long enough to capitalize on when the moment finally arrives. Gobblers often go silent once they commit, so stay still, stay alert, expectant to appear quietly. Unfortunately, after all that time waiting, I still ended up missing that bird and he flew away unharmed. But preparation doesn't stop when the bird shows up. Know your effective shotgun range. Pattern your gun before the season. Every gun shoots differently, and confidence comes from knowing your limits. Don't forget to aim for the head and the neck where the feathers and the wattles meet. Wait for a clear, stationary shot whenever possible. If the sight picture doesn't feel right, then don't force it. Every turkey deserves to have a clean end. And finally, turkey season is so short, so enjoy it as much as you can. Don't leave the woods too early, because midday can be very deadly. When hens leave for the nests, gobblers get lonely, and often the hunting pressure drops. And bad weather doesn't stop turkeys either. Rain and wind reduce pressure and can make birds less cautious, but adjust your calling volume and focus on sheltered areas. All in all, turkey hunting is a game of details. Scout thoroughly, move intelligently, set up with purpose. Call with restraint, stay patient, and finish strong. When you do these things consistently, success stops being accidental and it starts being repeatable. And finally, thanks so much for spending time with me today. If this episode helped you, share it with a hunting buddy, and I'll see you back in the woods. Don't forget you can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Wild About Turkey Hunting. The pursuit is wild. Never stop learning.